In this video, I'll be doing a repair of a Lemax Spookytown Trolley. It's a piece I've had for many years. I really like it, one of my favorites. It adds a lot to my display. I have a really nice train bridge that I built for it out of styrofoam, and I just think it's a nice addition, and it adds a lot of movement and activity to the village. But recently, it's been experiencing a couple issues. It runs really slow compared to how it used to run, about half, I think about half its normal speed. But more importantly, even with a full battery, fresh batteries, it only runs about 15, 30 minutes or so before it just kind of clunks to a stop. And it used to run for hours and hours. So we're going to try to break it down here just to show you what this looks like. This is the full sort of real-time speed it's running right now, which you can just tell it almost looks like it wants to stop at any second. But even if you set up the fresh track, fresh batteries and everything and line it all up and let it run out, it only runs, in this case, it ran for about 15 minutes and then it just peters out and stops. The lights still work, the sound will work and everything, but it's just the motion. So disassembly on these pieces is very straightforward. A couple screws will give you access to the bottom panel. The motor is there. That bottom panel actually disconnects with that little plastic connector, JST connector. You can pop out the axles at this point. They just kind of come out, the front and back axles. The connector, you can use pliers, you can use your fingers, whatever. The bottom piece is actually contains the little magnetic switch, reed switch, I think, that detects the magnets at the front and back of the track to set the reversal mode in action. Four more screws will be exposed, and undoing those four screws will let you separate sort of the top and the bottom chassis pieces, the motor unit from the other unit. The batteries basically on one side, motor, speaker, blob chip, circuit boards on the other, JST connector to separate those. That's the blob chip. So that will be tucked away in there. I, at this point, have already realized that the first thing that needs to get replaced on this is the motor since it's running so slow. Motor replacement is straightforward. Take the belt of the pulley off, and then two teeny tiny screws will release the motor from the chassis, and then just carefully use something to pry off the pulley and save the pulley for the new motor. I've already replaced the motor on this one at least once because you can tell I've got some heat shrink tubing there, but then just clip the wire connectors, the wires on the two connectors, and then it's simply a matter of soldering on a new motor, soldering on the connector wires to the new motor, black to black, red to red. I've got a link in the description for the motor I used on this. There's potential maybe to get the wrong speed, the wrong RPM on this, but they're all about 2400 RPM. So some heat shrink tubing. Also along the way, as I was putting it back together, I did notice the little post there with the LED was getting loose, so some hot glue to sort of tack that on a little bit better. And then I can start reassembling this. And it was when I was reassembling that I really started to notice something kind of weird. These two, or these pairs of cutouts in the chassis that let the two axles. So the one with the gear, call that the driven axle. I started to notice that it was sort of wearing through the cutouts in the black plastic chassis compared to the front. So the front is sort of just free wheels, free spinning axle. So I took a little plastic spacer and I cut it in half with an X-Acto knife and two pieces flew across my workshop. But those two little pieces were glued into place where the driven axle cutouts are to act as sort of an axle support. So getting some extra support in there to reverse kind of the wear and tear that had been happening. I'm using, in this case, this product from Micro Mark called Same Stuff. It's kind of a plastic welder. It's an alternative to super glue. I've been experimenting with it, but I got those welded, weld bonded or glued into place, you could use super glue. A little bit of grease, lubricant on the gears, and then just a quick test run. And as soon as I did this, replaced the motor and cleaned up that axle, things were working a lot better. My camera is the FPS of my camera is kind of messed up, so it looks like it's jumping, but it's smooth. But the speed was back to normal, so that seemed really, really promising. I then kind of forgot. I got distracted and went upstairs to do something else and got distracted and left the trolley running overnight unintentionally. But when I came down the next morning, it was a bit of a Halloween miracle. The thing was still running. So I was over 10 hours and it was just going and going and going. And since then, I found that it's been can run even longer than that. So three AA batteries, fresh AA batteries, and we've gone from 15 minutes to 10, 12 hours of runtime. So we're obviously doing something right. The motors are definitely really important, but super happy we got this fixed up. But just to kind of, it was one of those things that I discovered a little bit by accident, and it's kind of hard to explain in that video that I took while I was recording or while I was doing the repair. But I just wanted to pinpoint and highlight the fix on this. And this is probably one of the few places when I pop off this bottom cover, take the axles out, that you can actually see the defect that was kind of happening. The little cutouts, those little axle holes, you can see the ones on the back and the red arrow are a little bit deeper than the ones on the green arrow, the front axle there. And that's really what was happening is as it was wearing itself down, it was rubbing more, it was out of position, causing more drag on that motor. So this is a close-up of the spacer that I cut out and glued in place, and that sort of mimics the longer axle support that the freewheeling axle gets. So this is the spacer I used. I don't, it's just one of those little weird parts that I had in my junk bin, junk drawer. But just using a razor blade to slice one of those in half was enough to provide, yeah, better support, kind of realigning the axle a little bit higher. And then I ended up having to trim out around the gear, kind of trim out those little angles with just a razor or sandpaper or something to make sure that the gear, that worm gear, didn't get any interference on those new supports. But a little bit of grease, and that axle has much better support and positioning than it did before. And I think that really helped make sure that those wheels weren't rubbing on the upper chassis. And just, yeah, I think that's, I don't know why it wasn't kind of like that from the get-go, but this is kind of a good example of some of the fixes you can do. So just to review what we did here to get this thing going, I did replace the motor, so just a simple cutout, resoldering a new motor, and then I addressed that worn out sort of drive axle cutout with a little bit of an ad hoc fix with that spacer, but I think it was really worthwhile. So there are just a couple other little things I noticed along the way that you should watch out for on this particular piece, and that is making sure that the wheels on your axle are spaced correctly so you can push the wheels together or pull them apart. And mine were kind of out of alignment, out of adjustment, but put them on the track and then just kind of get it so the shoulder rides correctly. That shoulder piece, that big piece, should ride just inside on the inside of the track. But mine were a little bit out, so you can kind of push and pull, and they'll hold once you get them lined up right. You don't want them too tight, not too loose, but yeah, that's pretty simple. I think anyone can do that, and I did that on both the front and the back axles. And then the other thing I noticed was during reassembly, these two screws near the motor, they're holding the battery compartment onto the chassis. If you over tighten those screws, it can pinch on the pulley drive. And if you put too much pressure on there, watch what happens. If I just push on it, that worm gear just slows down, can actually stop it and stall out the whole system. So making sure you don't over tighten those screws is really important. I again installed a couple little spacers. I glued those in to prevent, just make it a little bit more difficult to over tighten them, I guess. But I think as long as you're careful and don't over tighten those screws, you'd be fine. So that is about it. Thanks for watching. Good luck with your repairs. Let me know if you have any questions about the specific piece or some other pieces that you're interested in. I'm going to be doing a few more videos like this on some of my other pieces, but please subscribe. We need it, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks.